to old occult Brahma, interminably far back, and the tender and junior Buddha. Now, just about this time, now as a result of the interest of all these people, the American Oriental Society was set up in 1842, and within 2 decades thereafter, Sanskrit was being taught at Yale and Harvard, which is amazing. I think it was not being taught in Oxford or Cambridge until the early part of the century, because the British thought that we had no civilization at all to offer. Now, Colonel Henry Olcott, reared in a Puritan Christian family, became deeply interested in Indian religions and late in life became a Buddhist. In 1895, in collaboration with Madame S.P. Blavatsky, a Russian emigre, he set up the Theological Society in New York. Mrs. Annie Besant, his successor as the Society's president, moved its headquarters to Madras. Now we come to Gandhi. With his innovative satyagraha struggles, first against racial injustice in South Africa and then against British colonialism and social injustices in India, Gandhi gave non-violence a new potency and status. Now, Gandhi's greatest contribution really, I think, is that until Gandhi's time, even those who spoke for non-violence only considered it as passive resistance. Like what Christ has said, someone strike you on the right cheek, you also give him the left. Someone takes your coat, you give him your shirt also. And that this in some way will convert your opponent, your attacker, your enemy. But Gandhi did not at all like the word passive resistance. It was therefore that he coined the word satyagraha. He himself says that. And in fact, in a letter when Tolstoy has written to him, he refers to this, I'm full of admiration for your passive resistance. Now, Gandhi wanted to make this point, it was not passive resistance. And for me, Gandhi is an interesting combination of Christ and Krishna, or Krishna and Christ. Now, what is Krishna's message? Krishna's message in the Gita is that when you are faced with evil and injustice, you just don't have a choice. Even if that injustice and the evil is embodied in your own family, your own brother, you still don't have a choice. Evil is evil, you just have to confront it. But how do you confront it? Christ was saying you confront it with love and with self-suffering. So Gandhi combined the two. He was going to oppose evil, like it happened when he was thrown out of his train and we saw all that racial discrimination and arrogance in South Africa. He was going to confront it, but he was going to confront it non-violently. So Gandhi is not a pacifist. This is often what I tell people nowadays. He was in fact a militant, but he was a non-violent militant. In fact, the great psychologist Erik Erikson, who's written this widely read book called Gandhi's Truth, makes this point. He calls Gandhi's satyagraha as militant non-violence, and that is the interesting thing about it. Now, his Salt March, of course, became known all over the world, and it's interesting that Time magazine made him Man of the Year in January 1931. And the New York Times editorialized and said that whereas Britain had lost America on tea, it was losing India on salt. And Will Durant wrote, China followed Sun Yat-sen, took up the sword and fell into the arms of Japan. India, weaponless, accepted as a leader one of the strangest figures in history and gave to the world the unprecedented phenomena of a revolution led by a saint and waged without a gun. Now, I won't speak more about Gandhi because you all know about him. I would like to go immediately to Martin Luther King, who became his most famous disciple. Now, in the film that I'm going to show, you will see what was the situation in the southern United States before Martin Luther King arrived. Not many people can even comprehend this, that it is less than 50 years ago. What was happening over there? And what was the situation that these people had to face? Now, Martin Luther King first heard about Gandhi from the president of Howard University. You have Harvard University for the whites and Howard University for the blacks down in the south. But it's also a fine institution, and it's there from the president he first heard about Gandhi. And he got very interested, and he felt that maybe they should try and see whether this will work there. So he comes to India in 1956, meets a whole lot of Gandhi's followers, and then decides that this is what he's going to try. And this is what he does. And he succeeds. Of course, like Gandhi, he gets killed. But he has made a point, and the struggle has succeeded. It was in the Montgomery bus boycott 19 Brother King first tried out his satyagraha in the struggle for racial equality. King expressed his great respect for Gandhi thus. Mahatma Gandhi was the first person in human history to lift the ethic of love of Jesus Christ above mere interaction between individuals and make it into a powerful and effective social force on a large scale. If humanity is to progress, Gandhi is inescapable. We may ignore him at our peril. The U.S. Civil Rights Act of 1970, which finally ended racial discrimination all over the U.S., is a monumental tribute to Martin Luther King's dedicated and fearless nonviolent struggle to which he gave everything he had, including his life. Now, at this point, I'm going to take a rest while we see the film. This will give some time to my aging mental batteries to replenish themselves and maybe give my knees also a little rest. This film, I'm sure you will find of great interest. So when the film's finished, I'll come back for the concluding part of my talk.
Of a South African jail, the young lawyer from India found no reason to complain.
Some say that jail is a palace. Others look upon it as a beautiful garden. Some others hold that through the jail gates we shall pass from our present bondage to freedom.
The year was 1907. The young lawyer from India was Mohandas Gandhi. Gandhi led his fellow Indians in a non-violent struggle against racial oppression for 8 years. They marched into forbidden territory. They burned their registration papers. They expected to be arrested, and they were not disappointed. Gandhi said, "Non-violent refusal to cooperate with injustice is the way to defeat it." J.C. Smuts, the Interior Minister, tells Gandhi, "You reduce me to helplessness. How can we lay hands on you without looking like villains?" He became known for his ability to mobilize people and for his increasingly simple way of life. He gave his non-violent weapon a name, Satyagraha, holding to truth. In every decade and on every continent, underdogs have taken up Gandhi's strategies to fight for their rights and freedom.
Non-violence means fighting back, but you're fighting back with other weapons.
The power that Gandhi discovered changed the 20th century. 60 years after Gandhi's struggle in South Africa, his ideas found new followers in the American South. Students at Fisk University, a leading black institution, can ignore segregation on campus, but when they venture downtown, many are shocked by the Southern system.
I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and although I had experienced segregation there, it was not the overt kind where there were signs on water fountains and on restrooms. It was humiliating.
Well, Nashville was a totally segregated city. It was as segregated as Johannesburg, the height of apartheid. It was a city of two races. There was virtually no contact between the white community and the black community. In school, in neighborhoods, in jobs, in church, Nashville was a totally and completely segregated city, and for the most part, totally satisfied and happy with that.
Students at American Baptist College in eastern Nashville know that segregation is being challenged, that some are working against the violent repression, even lynchings that enforce it. They want to join the struggle.
We've been taught one thing in the school about the Declaration of Independence, about the Bill of Rights, about the Constitution, and then in the real world, we were living something else.
James Lawson, a Methodist minister from Ohio, soon gives Nashville's students a chance to take part. The soft-spoken Lawson is 30 and has spent 3 years teaching in India, where he studied the work of Mohandas Gandhi. In a small church near the Fisk campus, Lawson has started a series of evening workshops on nonviolent action.
Now tonight we have a most important business to try to accomplish.
Jim Lawson's manner is cool. His objective is breathtaking: to eliminate segregation. His classes attract Nashville's brightest students.
A good friend of mine in Alabama here last April was taken out by the KKK and beaten on a tree, tied to a tree, beaten by chains and whatnot.
I thought nonviolence would not work. But I stayed with the workshops for one reason, and that is because they were the only game in town. That was the only group even trying to do anything to combat segregation that I knew about.
He started praying, Father, forgive these men.
Jim Lawson has been encouraged to come south by Martin Luther King Jr., who says the civil rights movement needs leaders who understand non-violent strategy and tactics.
Then they started protesting. You can't pray that prayer, they said. And then others said, yes, but the man who's going to die has a right to pray any way he wants to pray. And this immediately started a division among them.
We took the whole group through a holistic view of nonviolence, its history, its roots in the Bible, its roots in Christian thought, the methods of nonviolence. We told the stories of nonviolence. And I stressed the Gandhian idea of our being engaged in experiment.
It may have much more meaning to the attacker if, as he strikes you on the cheek, you're looking him in the eyes.
Unfortunately, the concept of nonviolence for many people is that you get hit on one cheek, you turn the other cheek, you don't do anything. But nonviolence means fighting back. But you're fighting back with another purpose and with other weapons. Number one, your fight is to win that person over. And that is a fight. That's a struggle. That's much more challenging than fisticuffs.
Right. Okay, say it.
If I would be, what is it that I would be able to do?
We said we were going to desegregate downtown Nashville. Our first step was going to be desegregate lunch counters and restaurants. That, of course, was a first Gandhian step. That was the first step of nonviolence. To research and examine and focus on an issue. Choose a target. Choose an issue.
Now, let's see.
Months before going to the lunchrooms, Lawson begins preparing them.
A bunch of niggers. Look at these balls all lined up. Hi there, Jungle Bunny. He's so dark, he's making the whole place dark.
He wants them to have experienced both physical and verbal attacks, and to learn how to resist the impulse to run or fight back.
Now let's see what we've learned from this to us as to how we might act nonviolently. What are the basic problems here so far?
You cannot go on a demonstration with 25 people doing whatever they want to do. They have to have a common discipline. And that's a key word for me, that the difficulty with nonviolent people and efforts is that they don't recognize the necessity of fierce discipline and training and strategizing and planning and recruiting and doing the kinds of things that you to have a movement. That can't happen spontaneously. It has to be done systematically.
They stage their first sit-in on a Saturday, when they are sure to be noticed.
We spent many, many hours anticipating some of the opposition. And we knew that that's one of the things that they would say. We don't want to sit next to dirty people while we have lunch. And so one of the ways we combated that was by having a dress code.
We had been told it was a possibility of being arrested, but we went to the lunch counter. We took our seats. We sat in a very orderly, peaceful fashion.
They are not surprised when they are refused service.
I said, I'm sorry, our management does not allow us to serve niggers in here.
Store managers quickly close the dining areas, but the students remain until closing time, reading and doing homework. There is no violence, and no one is arrested. The sit-ins make page 10 of the Sunday paper. City editor John Siegenthaler remembers the reaction.
The reaction initially was sort of shock and maybe even some humor. I mean, who do they think they are? What do they think they're doing? We knew it was a news story, but didn't really know how to cover it.
Local businesses take a predictable position. They'll close down before they'll serve black customers. A week later, the students are back. They provoke curiosity and verbal abuse, but no arrests. Whites still think the sit-ins are a passing fad, hardly a threat to the status quo. On the third Saturday, they are ready to target a total of 6 stores.
Let each person now get himself or herself a partner that they will stick with. Now, we don't want a white person with a Negro of the opposite sex, because we don't want to fight that battle.
We were told in advance that day that they were going to allow the hoodlums to beat us up, and then the policemen were going to arrest us. So we need to be prepared to get beaten and arrested. So that was a condition under which we went down.
Oh, man, you're not in a single group, are you? Will you go to this Woolsworth group?
We tried to be certain that our strongest and best leaders were leading each group that went in. We also had fairly disciplined groups go into each of the places that we decided to sit in on that Saturday. We decided that we'd have a second group ready for each store. Initially that morning we had some 600 people ready to be arrested, in fact.
By now they're well prepared for contingencies. Each group includes a leader and observers who will phone reports back to the church. Observers are carrying telephone numbers for ambulance services and a pocket full of telephone change. As they enter the stores, the second and third waves of demonstrators stay out of sight, ready to move in when the first group is arrested. As predicted, the police hang back for the first 15 minutes.
Went and asked each and every one of them separately to leave. They didn't leave, so I instructed the men to place them under arrest. We placed them under arrest. When we cleared the stools, some more colored boys and girls and white boys and girls got on the seats.
It really surprised the police. They thought they had lowered the boom. And when they turned around and looked and saw a lunch counter once again full of Negro students, you could just see that they kind of looked at each other out of the corners of their eyes as though, do you see this? What will we do now? And there was still another group ready to take their places.
We felt so proud and so happy that the things that we had been taught in these workshops, the things that we have learned, the role playing, the social drama that we had gone through, it was now we had to live it. And in a sense, I think we felt convincing ourselves that we had passed the test.
You're in jail. I'm joking. Man, what my mother gonna say when she hear about that?
We had a philosophy, which was a power of nonviolence. And that kind of power we felt was more forceful than all of their police force, all of their lawmakers, and all of their dogs or billy clubs or jails, and that our capacity and willingness to suffer outweighed any power they had.
Mass arrests are a victory for the students. Reporters realize they are covering a story of national significance.
I mean, it's like being a war correspondent in your own hometown. The only thing you knew was that the war was on, that the weapon of nonviolence was winning over violence, and that this was a historic moment, however it came out. I think there was a sense of history there that we all understood.
At police headquarters on Monday morning, the students are still behind bars. On principle, they have refused bail. In just 48 hours, their small student movement has inspired thousands. Now the city's black community has joined in the struggle, organizing, raising money, recruiting lawyers. Alexander Luby is among Nashville's most prominent black lawyers, and he has organized local lawyers to defend the arrested students. As they come before a judge, their arrests, like Gandhi's, have dramatized their grievances.
In the African American community, there was a great sense of righteous indignation. People couldn't believe that these young, well-dressed, innocent college students are being arrested and put in jail. They didn't like it. And the city, African American population was mobilized in such a fashion. And the movement spread through the city of Nashville like wildfire.
As the crowds wait to see what the city will do, the mayor speaks to reporters.
Anyone violating the law will be arrested. This must be so.
By emphasizing law and order, the mayor takes sides with the store owners. In fact, the arrested students have broken no law. and none of the white attackers has been arrested.
The city and police were ill-prepared for a mass civil disobedience effort. They had anticipated that once the violence took place and the arrest began, our movement would dissipate, would be chased away, because that's the purpose, after all, of doing the violence, and it's the purpose of doing the arresting. It's hopeful that then whatever this is will vanish, and that's the end of it. That didn't happen.
A week later, nothing has changed. As the students return to the lunch counters, the city has only one answer: more arrests. On trial for disorderly conduct, they face a choice: a $50 fine or 30 days in the county workhouse. Refusing to pay fines to support a system which oppresses them, they opt for the workhouse.
We had overloaded the jail. They didn't have enough, food or supplies and stuff like that. A lot of people had to work overtime, and so it was a burden on the system. But that's what we intended.
Now in the national spotlight, the movement is deluged with new recruits. Jim Lawson's workshops expand to meet the demand. Nashville's churches provide meeting space, telephones, mimeograph machines. Now they must get the message out, far beyond Nashville.
We were not simply addressing our immediate opponents. What we were doing was addressing the larger audience, the nation, the world. Because the strategy in nonviolence is that you educate a large number of constituents and win them on your side. In fact, even though we as African Americans were a minority, no change could take place unless you have the sympathy of the majority, if not the active participation.
The students know that sympathy by itself may not be enough. Taking advantage of the outrage their arrests have provoked, they escalate the conflict. Sit-ins continue, but a new tactic is added: a boycott of the downtown shopping district. Picketers ask customers not to patronize stores whose lunch counters are segregated. The students have created a momentum, now embraced by the larger community, as black clergy urge their congregation to stay away from the downtown shopping district altogether.
It allowed for the whole community to be participants in the movement, because that's one of the things that we in the nonviolent world always teach, namely that in the nonviolent movement everyone can be a participant. Children can participate, women can participate, men can participate, young people, old people. Everyone can do the work.
As the boycott takes hold, the sit-ins and arrests continue. The conflict becomes a seemingly permanent fact of life in the downtown shopping district. Picketing and boycotting provoke a racist backlash. But the counter-demonstrations backfire. Frightened white people begin avoiding the downtown area, unwittingly joining the boycott. A Fisk University economist calculates that some downtown stores have lost up to 40% of their business. As Easter approaches, the usual surge of spring buying never happens. Among blacks, the boycott is estimated at 98%.
That was a powerful message sent to the white community that, it's one thing just to deal with these students on a Saturday-to-Saturday basis and lock them up and let them get bailed out, and we'll try them and sentence them to $50 fines and that sort of thing. But it's another thing when you go down there and there's nobody on the street.
At Easter, the counters are still segregated. but the sit-ins have put civil rights on the national agenda as never before.
For the past several months, a new strategy to end racial segregation has been spreading through the South.
On Easter Sunday, NBC's Meet the Press looks at nonviolent resistance. The moderator suggests that boycotts might be better than sit-ins and arrests.
Dr. King, wouldn't you be on stronger grounds, though, if you refused to buy at those stores and if you called upon the white people of the country to follow you because of both your moral and your legal right not to buy?
I think, Mr. Spivak, sometimes it is necessary to dramatize an issue because many people are not aware of what's happening. And I think the sit-ins serve to dramatize the indignities and the injustices and the dissatisfaction of the Negro with the whole system of segregation.
We had a meeting planned for 6 a.m. I was in the dormitory getting dressed, and I heard this big boom. I soon learned that attorney Z. Alexander Luby's home had been bombed.
It, of course, was the effort of the enemy to scare us off. Violence has a very simple dynamic. I make you suffer more than I suffer. I make you suffer until you cry, "Uncle." Then you surrender. That's what a war is. It's violence. The difference with nonviolence is we don't want to beat the opponent up. We don't think that does any good.
Luby and his wife are uninjured, but as Lawson has taught his students, violence can backfire. The bombing has shocked the city and given the students a strategic opportunity. They send a telegram to the mayor demanding a meeting, and they organize a silent march from the campus to City Hall. They begin with 1,500 marchers. Along the way, their number doubles. Mayor Ben West is waiting for them. West gets into an argument with a black minister, but then Diane Nash steps forward with some very direct questions.
I asked the mayor, first of all, Mayor West, do you feel that it's wrong to discriminate against a person solely on the basis of his race or color?
I tried as best I could to answer it, frankly and honestly, that I could not agree that it was morally right for someone to sell them merchandise and refuse them service. And I had to answer it just exactly that way.
Nash goes on to ask the mayor whether he feels the lunch counters should be desegregated. He answers, yes.
It was the first major change in the attitudes of the city. Nashville began to desegregate its public institutions and its department stores that day. It took 3-4 years before theaters, restaurants, all public conveyances were desegregated. But with Ben West's declaration, no, it's not right, the process of change began.
The downtown retailers now tell the students privately they want to desegregate. The students devise a plan.
We suggested to them, which was a great relief to them, that there would be no announcement that the demonstrations had ended. There would be no announcements that black people were being served. No announcements, no press, no police.
Over a 2 weeks period, There would be what they call a trial basis where couples would go to a certain restaurant and eat, and then there would be white observers, or there would be whites sitting nearby. It was all planned, and it worked very, very well without any incidents.
A movement that began in the basement of a small church in September has desegregated the downtown lunchrooms by spring. They go on to desegregate other restaurants and public facilities, showing how to remove business support for segregation by making it costly and controversial. It's a weapon that will prove decisive as the civil rights movement gains momentum.
We realized that we had the resources, both the spiritual resources as well as the psychological skills, to make a difference in other places as well. We understood how to organize a community. We understood how to conduct a demonstration. We understood how to negotiate. And we understand how to deal with the media. We were warriors in that sense. We had been prepared. This was like a nonviolent academy, equivalent to West Point.
For the rest of the decade, they carry what they've learned farther south and across the country. Reflecting on what they had achieved, one of Nashville's students wrote, "You cannot wait for someone else to do it. You cannot wait for government to do it. You must make it happen through your own efforts and action and vision."
See this, first of all, there is a set of 6 films like this which shows successful non-violent struggles in India, in the US, in South Africa, in Denmark under the Nazis, in Poland, and in Chile, which is the most recent. I have brought a whole set of these 6 VCDs which I'm going to present to you, Dr. Srikantan, for NIAS. And in the research, which I hope very much all of you will do, you all will see, as you saw in this film, how seriously non-violent struggle is being taken in other countries, how people are researching in this, are setting up training workshops, training a whole lot of people, and how much of change has been brought about just using non-violent struggle. This is the first sort of major one after India. Then in the 80s, this was the real flowering, if I may say, of non-violent struggle. Just in the 80s, first you have South Africa, and it's amazing. Nelson Mandela is in jail, and a young sort of a student activist called Steve Biko, gets and mobilizes people. Sadly, he's taken and he's beaten and he dies. Then it's taken up by others, and this is what that film will show. Someone who is just 26 years old manages to sort of mobilize the whole thing, do economic boycott, something, and just brings down the apartheid government. Then Nelson Mandela is released from prison, elections are held, and Nelson Mandela and de Klerk, share the Nobel Prize. At the same time, almost in the Philippines, Corazon Aquino, her husband has been shot coming back from exile. He determined that he was going to confront the Marcos regime. When he lands off the airport, he's shot and killed. But then the wife takes up the struggle, and the whole nation joins them. And it seems amazing. They had nothing in their arms except statues of the Blessed Virgin and rosaries in their hands, just marching like this, and the Marcos regime, came down. Since then, it has happened in a whole lot of countries. In Poland with Lech Walesa, and then in the GDR, in Romania, in Serbia, in Russia, ultimately, now in Georgia, in Uzbekistan, all over. And the most recent thing for me, the most impressive of all, is to see one single woman, the mother of a soldier called Cindy Sheehan, who decides that she is going to protest. One single woman. She goes and plants herself in front of President Bush's ranch, and that one woman suddenly becomes a whole lot of people. And not only that, she gets the whole press and the whole nation is seeing it and are aroused. That is the power of non-violence, I must say, that without one single thing. I find now miners in Bolivia, petrol workers in Ecuador, none of them very educated, but they have learned the secret of what is called people's power. Because when people are willing to die, for the cause, never to kill, but to die for the cause, to unite and to face whatever is there, then you really cannot. Even the most powerful government in the world is unable really to face this. Now, I would like to end by reading to you, bringing to your notice something which is not very well known, because even those of you who have seen these films or read a lot about this generally know about peace movements. One of the things which people don't know in India is the fact as to how much non-violent struggle has been studied by military analysts, to see what is the power and potential of this. And this started after the 1956 Hungarian uprising. They sort of rose non-violently, etc., etc. It was very brutally suppressed. But even after they were suppressed militarily, they did not give in. They were still resisting, like the Danes had done under the Nazi occupation. At no place really could the Germans sort of pin down to say that, someone is not doing something. They just had to sort of go slow all over, or orders would not be carried out. They were supposed to teach Nazi propaganda in the schools and, people wouldn't do it. Now, what do? You can't sort of go around shooting everyone. And you can't even pin it down because everyone is doing it. So they began to study this. Conferences have been held of military people. Let me just read out to you here. Maybe from here. Even before Martin Luther King took up the non-violent struggle against racial oppression in the U.S. South, a few U.S. and Western intellectuals were considering non-violent struggle as a possible alternative to destructive warfare. In 1928, Walter Lippmann wrote in favor of non-violent conflict resolution. In 1937, Kenneth Boulding, in his Paths of Glory, A New Way to War, affirmed the technological revolution had made war dysfunctional and proposed that Britain adopt a non-violent defense policy as a functional substitute for war. Lindbergh in Denmark, 1937, and Vrind in Holland, 1938, urged similar action for their respective countries. In 1955, Arne Næss and Johan Galtung in Norway enunciated the concept of non-violent social defense based on Gandhi's ideas, and thus established a direct link between Gandhi and modern social defense theory. In the US, Cecil Henshaw, 1956, argued that military defense in the nuclear age was too expensive and proposed social defense as a sensible option. In 1958, US diplomat and Sovietologist George Kennan suggested civilian and paramilitary resistance in Western Europe would be a more practical defense policy for the Atlantic Alliance than conventional military force. Separately, in 1959, Johan Galtung in Norway and Gene Sharp in the USA carefully analyzed various non-violent resistance movements, particularly during Nazi occupation of Denmark and Norway, and established a credible case for social defense. Sharp pointed out that in an era of weapons of mass destruction, military power no longer has the capacity to defend one's own people and nation except through assured mutual destruction. Superiority in conventional military strength enables an aggressor to invade and occupy a country, but not to secure political control of it unless the victims willingly or unwillingly accept it. As we see this happening in Iraq today, with all their smart bombs to shock and awe people, they had expected the whole thing to last only 1 week or 10 days. It's 2.5 years, and they cannot even control Baghdad, as you see. Now, the 1964 Oxford Conference on Civilian Defense brought together military strategists, defense researchers, political analysts, and people with direct experience of non-violent resistance, and resulted some years later in a scholarly publication by Adam Roberts on the efficacy and potential of non-violent defense. The 1967 Munich Conference resulted in setting up of a research group led by Theodor Ebert It made a detailed study of the 1968 Soviet suppression of the Czech uprising and the civilian resistance which followed. This group subsequently submitted a proposal for German social defense strategy. Now, Paul Weir, who has written this article sort of summarizing all this in Nonviolent Struggle and National Defense, sort of concludes his historical survey of the evolution of social defense thus. Social defense as a concept originated in the ethical principles of the Gandhian movement and in pacifist ideology. The Gandhian movement demonstrated the power of massive non-cooperation with an occupying power, in that case Britain. As the destructiveness of modern war became more evident, it was natural that the principles and techniques of Gandhian non-cooperation would be applied to the problem of national defense. At first, social defense research was non-governmental. By the 1970s, governments were supporting it and political parties and peace movements were debating it. A quarter century of scholarly research has produced a respectable body of knowledge about the underlying principles, diverse methods, and practical developments of social defense. Only time and events will tell whether Gandhi's ideas and practice will be as influential in the era of national defense as they have been in the field of social change. Now, I shall end here having brought to your notice that it is not just pacifists and peace movements that have been studying and using Gandhi, but now it is being seriously studied and researched really even by military analysts. And there are 3 countries, Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Holland or Lithuania, if I'm not, where they have actually made non-violent defense as an integral part of national defense plans, because they know, however much they might arm, if for instance tomorrow either Russia or Germany is going to invade Sweden or Finland or Holland, there is no way in which they can stand up. But they obviously don't want just to give up. They want to resist, and you have to train your people, how you might resist this. Since the NIAS has done me the honor of inviting me to speak here, I would like to end by appealing to NIAS that as an institution of advanced learning, I think it is very, very necessary that you all begin a research program here. Like, for instance, the Swedish International Peace Research Institute is doing a lot of work in this. This was where Ahimsa was born. And I believe it is time that we give serious thought to it, to see what is the potential of this. And the potential is really very, very great. I have brought here, as I mentioned already, 6 of these videos. I must confess it's not quite so legal, because the original thing I got as videos, out of which we have made the VCDs. But these are difficult to get, and in fact when I tried to order them, they said that they were not sending them. Or so they have been made actually with help from the Albert Einstein Institute and the US Institute of Peace. So we have put them in VCDs, and the videos now are going out of fashion. So anyone who is interested might like to come and research this in the library here. I've also brought a book by Gene Sharp, who has now become the greatest authority on this whole non-violent struggle. He was professor at Harvard for many years. Now he's at the Albert Einstein Institute. And it's called Nonviolent Struggle, 20th Century Achievements and 21st Century Potential. He has made a very detailed study of 27 different nonviolent struggles all over in the previous century, and has indicated what is needed for successful nonviolent struggle. As was said by the minister over here, that non-violent struggle, you can't go into war without any training. Similarly, you can't go into non-violent struggle without training. You have to train people, you have to strategize, you have to plan. And this, I think, needs really research, and this was the great hope raised in me with Dr. Kasturi Rangan when he wrote to say that this was of great interest, that we would like to bring various sort of departments, institutions, etc. into this whole process. And I end expressing this hope that it will soon become a reality. I thank you.
For me, this has been a very fascinating evening. The lecture was, in fact, the contents of the lecture was so broad that I was taken back to my younger days when I participated. I was not in the front line but in the second line of the 1942 movement, because it was very similar that when the movement started, our leaders all went and sat in the jail, but it was the spontaneous student movement that really started and it worked. And so one was really reminded of it, and I think these movies will be very valuable and we will make good use of them, very discreetly, as you pointed out. I must thank you on behalf of NIAS for giving this lecture, and I'm sure we'll have more opportunities to learn from you much more about this kind of very unique kind of information which is very hard to get, basically, because of your wide experience and contact with so many people, and being an ambassador in many countries, probably you have been able to amass such a wealth of information. It's very kind of you to have shared it with us, and I'm sure if Kasturangan was here, he would have been very happy too, because he is thinking of taking up some seriously very activity in this whole interdisciplinary area of science, politics and economics, everything basically. In fact, that is the objective of the Institute. Now with the new building coming up, we will have a little more space, and probably we can expand our activities. Probably the building will be ready in about 6 months' time, 6 to 8 months' time. So activities will start. With those few words, I would like to thank you once again, Mr. Nazarath, for this wonderful lecture. And it has been a very late hour, otherwise we would have had some more questions and answers. But I think we have already spent 2 hours, so we will have another occasion for it. Thank you very much.